The city never slept, and neither did gossip. One chilly evening, as Eliza hurried home from a client meeting, she stopped in front of a giant electronic billboard in Times Square. Her breath caught in her throat. There they were, Adrian and Serena, plastered across the screen in dazzling perfection. The advertisement wasn't for a product. It was for the upcoming Billionaire Gala. Adrian was listed as one of the evening's keynote honorees, the caption reading, "Celebrating innovation, leadership, and legacy." His arm was wrapped tightly around Serena's waist, her gown shimmering like liquid silver as she beamed at the cameras. To the world, they looked like a fairy tale. To Eliza, it was a knife twisting deeper into wounds that had never fully healed. Her chest ached as pedestrians stopped to admire the photo. She overheard two young women whisper, "They're such a power couple. Can you imagine living that life?" Another voice added, "Serena Vela is stunning. Adrian Cole is so lucky." Eliza turned away quickly, her face burning. They didn't know the truth, that the man they praised had thrown his pregnant wife onto the streets. But Adrian wasn't content with silent humiliation. Days later, Serena posted a video on her social media. She sat in a marble bathroom holding up a diamond necklace. "When a man knows your worth, he invests in you," she purred, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. The comment section exploded with praise, envy, and admiration. What the world didn't know was that the necklace had been purchased with company funds. Adrian didn't care. To him, flaunting Serena was worth more than any investor's trust. The cruelty escalated. At a charity luncheon attended by socialites and journalists, Serena leaned into Adrian's ear and whispered loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Can you imagine if you had stayed with her? She'd be dragging you down with that baby." Adrian chuckled, raising his glass in agreement. Several guests laughed, others gasped, but no one defended the absent Eliza. By the next morning, gossip columns buzzed with speculation. Was Adrian's ex-wife really pregnant when he left her? Eliza read the headlines alone in her tiny studio, her hands trembling as she scrolled. The humiliation was unbearable, not just because they mocked her, but because they mocked the child she carried. She pressed her palms against her swollen belly, whispering, "Don't listen to them. You are not a mistake, you are my miracle." Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Still, she refused to crumble. Pain turned into fuel. If Adrian thought she would hide forever, he was wrong. She began pouring her energy into a new design project, determined to prove to herself, and eventually the world, that she was more than the woman he had tried to erase. And just when she thought the weight of the public humiliation might crush her, a lifeline appeared. Ethan Blackwell, the billionaire developer whose company owned the office she had recently redesigned, called her personally. His deep, steady voice carried no judgment, only respect. "I've seen your work. It's remarkable. I'd like to offer you a larger project, something that could change your career." Eliza blinked at her phone, her heart racing. Someone powerful had noticed her. Someone who didn't see her as disposable. For the first time in months, hope flickered. What she didn't know was that Ethan's invitation would not only transform her career, it would lead her straight back into Adrian's glittering world, where her very presence would shatter his mask before everyone who once admired him. The body can only carry so much weight before it begins to crack. For months, Eliza had pushed herself to the edge. Long nights sketching blueprints, climbing stairs with heavy grocery bags, skipping meals so she could save money for her unborn child. Her will was strong, but her body was whispering a warning she refused to hear. One bitter January evening, as she returned from a client meeting with snowflakes clinging to her coat, she felt a stabbing pain ripple across her belly. At first, she brushed it off as fatigue, but the pain sharpened, doubling her over in the middle of the sidewalk. Her sketchbook fell into the snow. Strangers passed by, some glancing, others ignoring her entirely. She pressed her hand against her stomach, fear clawing at her chest. "Please, not now," she whispered through clenched teeth. Her vision blurred as she stumbled toward a bench. A kind older man noticed her distress and rushed to her side. "Miss, are you all right? You need help?" She could only nod weakly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Within minutes, an ambulance's siren cut through the icy night. The hospital room was sterile, the fluorescent lights unforgiving. Eliza lay on the bed, monitors beeping steadily beside her, her heart hammering in sync with the machine's. A nurse adjusted her IV while the doctor spoke calmly, though his words struck like thunder. You've been under too much stress. Your body is telling you to slow down. If you don't, the baby could be at risk. Eliza's breath caught. At risk? Her voice cracked, trembling with terror. The doctor softened his tone. Your baby is still strong, but you need rest, proper nutrition, and no overexertion. Otherwise, we may face complications. Alone in the room, Eliza broke down. Her shoulders shook as sobs poured out, raw and unrestrained. She clutched her stomach as if to shield her child from the cruelty of the world. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I pushed too hard, but I promise I won't give up on you. The weight of loneliness pressed down harder than ever. Adrian was nowhere. The man who should have been beside her during every checkup, holding her hand through every scare, was out in the world, smiling for cameras with Serena on his arm. And here she was, fighting for the tiny life inside her with no one to lean on. But fate rarely lets someone suffer unnoticed forever. The next morning, as she struggled to gather her belongings after discharge, a nurse handed her an envelope. This came for you, Miss Moore. Dropped off at the front desk. Confused, Eliza tore it open. Inside was a simple note, handwritten in neat ink. You are stronger than you think. Don't carry this burden alone, E.B. Her hands shook as she read the initials. Ethan Blackwell. She had met him only once in passing, when she delivered samples for his company's project. How could he know she was here? How could he care? And then she noticed something else tucked into the envelope. A business card, embossed with his name and a private phone number. Her heart raced. Was this help or another trap? Eliza stared at the card, torn between fear and hope. Little did she know, dialing that number would set into motion a chain of events that would bring her face to face with Adrian again. This time, on the grandest stage of all. For 2 days, the card sat untouched on Eliza's nightstand. She would glance at it each morning, her hand hovering over the embossed letters, before pulling back. She didn't trust easily anymore. Adrian had taught her how dangerous it was to place your future in someone else's hands. But she couldn't deny the weight of Ethan Blackwell's note. You are stronger than you think. On the third night, after another restless evening filled with worry about bills, rent, and doctor's visits, she finally dialed the number. The line clicked, and a steady, low voice answered almost immediately. Eliza Moore? Her breath caught. Yes, this is she. This is Ethan Blackwell, the voice said, calm but warm. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I heard about what happened, and I wanted to make sure you're all right. Eliza's guard shot up. How could you possibly know? There was a pause before he replied. The nurse who called the ambulance last night happens to be my foundation's volunteer. She recognized your name from our office project. She told me you'd been admitted. I thought you might need someone in your corner. Eliza's heart pounded. A billionaire offering help was not something she was used to. I don't want pity, Mr. Blackwell. Good, Ethan said without hesitation. Because I'm not offering pity. I'm offering opportunity. I've seen your designs. They're extraordinary. I want to commission you for one of my properties, a full redesign. No charity, no handouts, just work you deserve. The words sank in slowly like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. You've seen my work? I have, he confirmed. The Midtown office you designed? It impressed me. You have vision, and I don't say that lightly. For the first time in months, Eliza felt something stir in her chest. Pride. Someone powerful had noticed her not for who she had been, not as Adrian's discarded wife, but for who she was. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Why me? You could hire anyone. Because talent deserves to be recognized, Ethan said firmly. And because I believe people who've been underestimated often build the most remarkable things. His words disarmed her. Against her instincts, Eliza agreed to meet. The next day, she walked into the Blackwell Tower, feeling small against the glass and steel that scraped the sky. But when she stepped into Ethan's office, she was struck not by luxury, but by simplicity. The walls were lined with books, not trophies. Family photos sat on the desk, not awards. Ethan himself was nothing like Adrian. Where Adrian was slick and performative, Ethan radiated steadiness. His eyes were sharp, but kind. His handshake was firm, but respectful. They spent hours discussing design. Eliza spread sketches across his table, her hands moving with the passion she thought she'd lost. Ethan listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, nodding at her ideas like they mattered. By the end of the meeting, she felt lighter than she had in months. When she rose to leave, Ethan stopped her gently. "Eliza, this project is just the beginning. But I need to ask you something. The gala next month. I'll be there as a sponsor. Adrian will be there too. If you want the world to see who you really are, that might be the place." Eliza froze, her heart thundering in her chest. The gala. The very place where Adrian and Serena flaunted their so-called empire. Could she face them? Ethan's steady gaze held hers as he said quietly, "Think about it. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your power is to step back into the room where you lost it." The thought of the Billionaire Gala haunted Eliza for days. It was the stage where Adrian shined brightest, the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. Walking into that room meant exposing herself not only to him and Serena, but to a world that had already judged her as weak, discarded, and irrelevant. And yet Ethan's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the only way to reclaim your power is to step back into the room where you lost it. At first, she resisted. "I don't belong there," she told him during a follow-up meeting at Blackwell Tower. "That world isn't mine anymore." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You belonged there long before Adrian. You just didn't have anyone who respected you enough to remind you. Now you do." Those words lodged deep in her chest, stirring something fragile and long buried. It wasn't romance she felt. It was recognition. Someone finally saw her as more than a shadow of Adrian Cole. Over the following weeks, Ethan became more than just a client. He checked in regularly, not with pity, but with steady encouragement. When Eliza presented mood boards for the redesign project, Ethan didn't just glance at them. He studied every detail, asking why she chose certain textures, how she envisioned the flow of light. He valued her mind in a way Adrian never had. Slowly, she began to let down her guard. She told Ethan about the nights she'd spent sketching by candlelight, about the loneliness of her studio apartment, about the baby who kept her company with every tiny kick. Ethan listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his silence respectful. One evening, after a long design session, Ethan offered her a ride home. She hesitated. Accepting favors still felt dangerous, but when she saw his driver waiting with the car door open, she allowed herself to sink into the leather seat. For once, she didn't feel like charity. She felt safe. Back in her apartment, she pulled out the only dress she owned that might pass for formal. It was simple, a navy gown she had worn once at a smaller charity event years ago. The fabric no longer fit her growing body. She sighed, tears stinging her eyes. How could she walk into the gala, 8 months pregnant, wearing something outdated, when Serena would arrive dripping in diamonds? The next day, a garment bag appeared outside her door. No note, no explanation. Inside was a flowing gown in deep emerald silk, its design both elegant and forgiving, perfectly tailored to her figure. She traced the fabric with trembling fingers. She didn't need to ask who had sent it. Her first instinct was to refuse. But as she stood in front of the mirror, the gown hugging her curves and highlighting the life she carried, something shifted. She didn't see the discarded wife of Adrian Cole anymore. She saw a woman standing tall, radiant, and ready to be seen. Her baby kicked then, as if in agreement. Still, fear lingered. Could she really face Adrian? Could she stand in the same room as Serena and not crumble? Ethan seemed to sense her doubts when they met again. "You're not going there to fight them," he said gently. "You're going there to show the world you're not broken. Sometimes that's the sharpest weapon you can carry." Eliza nodded, her heart pounding. For the first time, she let herself believe she could do this. What she didn't know was that Adrian and Serena were already plotting their grand entrance at the gala, a performance designed to crush anyone who dared challenge their perfect facade. The night before the gala, the city pulsed with anticipation. News outlets buzzed about which billionaires would attend, which gowns would dominate the red carpet, and which power deals would be sealed under chandeliers and champagne. For Adrian Cole and Serena Vale, it was a coronation, a chance to parade themselves as the empire of the future. For Eliza Moore, it was a battle she wasn't sure she was strong enough to fight. That evening, she sat in her studio, the emerald gown hanging neatly in the closet, glowing like a secret promise. She traced her belly, whispering to her unborn child, Tomorrow, we face them, not for revenge but for us, for your future. But as if her body sensed the weight of what lay ahead, a sharp, searing pain coursed through her stomach. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. The pain rolled over her in waves, stronger than anything she had felt before. Panic surged. "No, no, not now," she whispered, staggering to the couch. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her vision blurring. She tried to calm herself, remembering the doctor's warning. Stress could trigger complications. She forced herself to inhale slowly, pressing a trembling hand against her belly. The baby kicked, steady and strong. Relief washed through her, but the pain didn't vanish, it lingered, a cruel reminder of how fragile her situation was. Her phone buzzed on the table. With shaking fingers she answered. Ethan's voice filled the silence, calm but concerned. "Eliza, are you all right? You sound out of breath." Tears spilled as she whispered, I don't know if I can do this." There was a pause, then Ethan's tone shifted, firm and grounding. "Listen to me. You're stronger than you think. You've carried this child. You've carried yourself through storms most people couldn't survive. One more night won't break you." His certainty wrapped around her like a blanket. She nodded, even though he couldn't see. "But what if I collapse tomorrow, in front of all of them?" "Then you'll rise again," Ethan said without hesitation. "Because no matter what happens, you're not walking into that room alone." His words steadied her heartbeat. She lay back on the couch, clutching the phone like a lifeline. Slowly, the pain dulled, leaving behind exhaustion. Later that night, she dreamed of the gala. Not the laughter or the music, but the faces turning toward her, the whispers, the judgment. In her dream, Adrian smirked, Serena's laughter rang out, and Eliza felt herself shrinking. But then another figure appeared beside her, tall and steady, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Ethan. His presence silenced the whispers. She woke with tears on her cheeks, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from hope. Morning came gray and cold. The city hummed as limousines lined up outside luxury hotels, cameras already flashing. Eliza rose slowly, every muscle aching but her resolve unshaken. She slipped into the emerald gown, its fabric cool against her skin. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not the discarded wife, not the woman mocked in tabloids. She saw a survivor. As she stepped out of her apartment, Ethan's car waited at the curb. He emerged, dressed in a tailored black suit, his eyes locking onto hers with quiet reassurance. For a moment, the world felt still. But miles away, Adrian and Serena were already rehearsing their entrance, smugly confident that the night would belong to them, unaware that Eliza's return would turn their triumph into ruin. The Billionaire Gala was the crown jewel of New York's social season, a glittering spectacle where fortunes were flaunted and reputations were sealed. The ballroom of the Astoria Grand shimmered with golden chandeliers, crystal centerpieces, and a sea of gowns worth more than most people's homes. Journalists lined the velvet ropes outside, cameras flashing as black limousines deposited the city's elite one by one. Tonight, Adrian Cole was determined to reign as king. He stepped out of his car in a midnight tuxedo, tailored within an inch of perfection, his polished shoes gleaming under the spotlights. At his side, Serena dazzled in a scarlet silk gown that clung to her every curve, her diamond necklace catching the light with every step. Together, they looked like a painting of triumph, youth, wealth, and power captured in living form. The crowd gasped and whispered as the pair ascended the marble stairs. Serena smiled with practiced ease, raising her hand for the cameras, while Adrian slipped effortlessly into his favorite role, the man everyone wanted to be. Reporters shouted questions about his upcoming projects, about the future of his company, about Serena's rumored new role. Adrian grinned, replying smoothly, "The future is brighter than ever." Inside the ballroom, the orchestra played a sweeping overture as waiters circulated with trays of champagne. Conversations hummed around the tables, punctuated by bursts of laughter from investors, CEOs, and politicians. Everywhere Adrian turned, hands reached out to shake his, voices congratulated him on his recent success. He basked in it, lifting his glass high, his confidence swelling. Serena leaned close, whispering into his ear, "They adore you. Tonight, you'll erase every trace of her. She won't even exist." Adrian smirked, his gaze sweeping the glittering room. She never did. While the crowd admired them, cracks simmered beneath the surface. A handful of investors exchanged wary glances, their smiles tight. They had heard rumors about misused funds, about Serena's growing influence, but for now they played along. Adrian Cole was still golden in the public eye, and no one dared challenge him in this arena. The evening unfolded with calculated grandeur. A famous opera singer took the stage, her voice soaring through the hall. Guests toasted to innovation, to legacy, to the power of ambition. Serena posed for photos, ensuring every camera caught her diamond necklace, every angle captured her triumphant glow. And yet, amidst the glitter and applause, whispers began to ripple. A few guests leaned toward one another, murmuring softly, "Isn't his ex-wife pregnant? I heard she vanished months ago. Do you think she'll ever show her face again?" Adrian overheard, but his smirk never wavered. He relished the speculation. Let them wonder. In his mind, Eliza was finished, buried beneath the weight of her own weakness. Tonight was about him, about the empire he built and the woman who stood proudly by his side. As the orchestra shifted to a softer melody, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's keynote honoree, Mr. Adrian Cole." Applause thundered as Adrian strode to the podium, Serena glowing at the table below. He adjusted the microphone, savoring the moment. His voice rang out, smooth and commanding. "Tonight, we celebrate not only success, but resilience, vision, and the power of never giving up." The irony hung heavy in the air, though only a few sensed it. And just as Adrian began his speech, the ballroom doors creaked open. Heads turned. Gasps rippled through the room. Because standing in the doorway, radiant in emerald silk and 8 months pregnant, was the woman he had sworn would never return. Eliza Moore. The air inside the ballroom shifted the moment the doors opened. The applause meant for Adrian's speech faltered, thinning into silence as heads turned toward the grand entrance. Gasps rippled like waves, a collective intake of breath that sucked the music right out of the room. There she was, Eliza Moore. She stood framed by the gilded doorway, the emerald gown flowing around her like a river of light. Her hand rested protectively on her swollen belly, 8 months of undeniable truth that could no longer be hidden. The chandelier above caught her hair, casting a halo around her face. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't the discarded wife or the woman whispered about in gossip columns. She was luminous, unshakable, and breathtaking. The crowd erupted in whispers. "That's her. Adrian's wife. No, ex-wife? She's pregnant. Dear God, look at her." He said she was gone. At the podium, Adrian froze. His practiced confidence shattered in an instant. His fingers tightened around the microphone, his knuckles white. He stared at Eliza as if she were a ghost risen from the grave, a secret he had buried clawing its way into the light. Serena's smile faltered. She clutched her champagne glass so tightly the stem nearly snapped. The diamonds at her throat sparkled, but her composure cracked as she realized every camera, every eye in the room, had shifted away from her. Eliza took a step forward. The sound of her heels against the marble floor echoed through the cavernous hall. With each step, the whispers grew louder. Some faces glowed with admiration, others with shock, still others with quiet judgment. But none of it touched her. Her heart pounded, but she forced her shoulders back, her chin high. She was not here to beg. She was not here to break. She was here to reclaim the dignity Adrian had stolen. When she reached the center of the room, she paused, scanning the crowd. Her eyes met Adrian's. For a heartbeat, silence reigned again. The man who had demanded she erase their child now stood face to face with living proof of his cruelty. "Eliza," Adrian stammered, his voice unsteady, breaking the silence. What are you doing here?" Her lips curved into the faintest, calmest smile. "Finishing what you started." Gasps echoed once more. Cameras clicked furiously, journalists scribbling notes with feverish energy. The very image Adrian had tried to bury was now immortalized, splashed across 100 lenses. Adrian's chest rose and fell in shallow bursts. He tried to steady himself, but the sweat beating at his temple betrayed him. He looked at Serena, desperate for support, but she refused to meet his gaze. She was too busy calculating how this scene would play on tomorrow's headlines. The master of ceremonies shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the podium and the spectacle unfolding. No one dared interrupt. This was no longer Adrian Cole's night. It was Eliza Moore's. And then, without warning, another figure stepped into the ballroom. Ethan Blackwell. Tall, commanding, and impossibly composed, he walked straight toward Eliza, his presence cutting through the whispers like a blade. When he reached her, he offered his arm. Without hesitation, she placed her hand on it, and together they turned to face the crowd. The room exploded in flashes. Cameras went wild. Whispers became shouts. And in that instant, Adrian Cole realized he was no longer the king of the room. He was the man about to be dethroned by the wife he had betrayed and the billionaire now standing at her side. Adrian Cole had faced hostile boardrooms, skeptical investors, even last-minute product failures. He had always managed to talk his way out, charm his way through, or intimidate until the room bent to his will. But tonight was different. Tonight, the ground beneath him was crumbling, and everyone could see it. As Ethan Blackwell guided Eliza to the center of the ballroom, the crowd surged closer, their murmurs swelling into a wave of speculation. Cameras flashed with merciless precision, capturing Adrian's paling face, Eliza's radiant defiance, and Ethan's unshakable composure. Adrian gripped the podium like a lifeline, his voice booming louder than necessary. "Ladies and gentlemen, please, let's remember why we're here. Tonight is about innovation, leadership, the future of..." But no one was listening. The guests' eyes were fixed on Eliza, their whispers carrying sharp daggers. "That's his wife? She's pregnant? He abandoned her?" Serena leaned toward him, her lips barely moving, her voice laced with venom. "Do something. You're losing them." Adrian's mask cracked. His jaw tightened as he stepped away from the podium, striding toward Eliza and Ethan with forced bravado. His laugh was brittle, echoing awkwardly through the hall. "Well, isn't this something? Eliza Moore, everyone. My former partner. It's been quite some time." The room went silent, the air heavy with judgment. Eliza met his gaze steadily, her voice calm and cutting. 8 months, to be exact. The words landed like a blow. Gasps erupted as eyes darted between her pregnant form and Adrian's rigid posture. The timeline was undeniable. The man who preached about resilience and legacy had demanded his wife destroy the very life now growing inside her. Adrian's face flushed crimson. He forced another laugh, but his eyes betrayed panic. "She's clearly confused. We parted ways long before this situation." He gestured vaguely at her belly, his tone dismissive. That one word, situation, ignited the crowd. Whispers turned into sharp murmurs. He called his own child a situation? Monstrous. How could he? Serena's smile faltered, the sparkle in her eyes replaced by dread. She clutched Adrian's arm, hissing through her teeth. "You're digging your own grave." Adrian's desperation mounted. He turned to Ethan, his voice sharp. "And you, what's your role in all this? Playing savior? Collecting strays to polish your reputation?" Ethan's expression remained calm, almost amused. "I don't need to polish anything, Adrian. My reputation stands on its own. I'm simply standing beside someone who deserves respect, something you clearly never gave her." The audience erupted, some in applause, others in scandalized murmurs. Adrian's attempt at control had backfired spectacularly. His chest heaved as sweat gathered at his temple, his polished facade unraveling before the very people whose approval he craved. Desperate, he turned back to Eliza, lowering his voice though the microphone still caught every word. "Why are you here, Eliza? To embarrass me? To ruin me?" She lifted her chin, her hand resting firmly on her belly. "No, I'm here to stand in the light. You did enough to ruin yourself." A hush fell, the weight of her words echoing louder than any speech Adrian could deliver. He opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, a man in a sharp suit stepped onto the stage. One of the gala's organizers whispered something urgently to the MC, who quickly grabbed the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice shaking slightly, "there has been a development. We ask that everyone remain calm." The crowd shifted, anticipation rising. Adrian's eyes darted wildly as he realized this wasn't just about Eliza anymore. Someone else had come prepared to expose him, and the reckoning he'd feared was about to begin. The ballroom's golden glow suddenly felt colder, sharper, as the master of ceremonies struggled to steady his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the screens." A hush fell. The massive LED panels lining the walls flickered to life. At first, images appeared innocuous, financial spreadsheets, company logos, but then the details sharpened. Names, dates, transactions. Red circles highlighted sums in the hundreds of thousands labeled under client development. But the receipts told another story. luxury vacations, designer jewelry, and private spa retreats, all tied to Serena Vale. Gasps rippled through the crowd. That's company money. Is this real? Oh my God. Adrian's face drained of color. Stop this, he barked, turning on the organizers. This is private information. Turn it off. But the presentation rolled on. Screens now displayed screenshots of text messages. His text messages. Words projected 10 feet tall for all to see. Handle it, Eliza. I don't care how. You know what to do. This baby is not happening. Get rid of it. Don't ruin my future because of your weakness. Each line struck like a blade. Eliza's eyes burned, but she stood tall, her hand steady on Ethan's arm. She didn't flinch. She wanted the truth exposed, no matter how painful. The crowd murmured louder, outrage rising. He told her to? Unbelievable. That poor woman. Adrian's panic turned feral. He lunged toward the stage, grabbing the microphone. These are lies, fabrications. A smear campaign orchestrated by jealous competitors. His voice cracked under the weight of desperation. But the screens weren't finished. A video clip appeared now, grainy but clear enough. Adrian in his office, Serena perched on his desk, his voice unmistakable as he sneered. She's too weak to fight back. Once she's gone, the company is mine, and so are you. The room erupted, gasps, shouts, even boos. Cameras clicked like a firing squad, immortalizing every second of his unraveling. Serena's mask of confidence shattered. She hissed at Adrian. You said no one would ever find that. She pulled back from him, desperate to protect herself. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm, steady, carrying across the chaos. This is not about business rivalries. This is about accountability, about a man who thought his power gave him the right to discard lives, his wife's, his child's, his employees'. Tonight, the truth stands before you. Judge it for yourselves. Applause broke out. Not from everyone, but from enough to tilt the balance. Adrian staggered back, the room no longer his kingdom, but his courtroom. He turned to Eliza, his voice trembling with rage. You did this. You're destroying me. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. No, Adrian, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped covering for you. The words hit harder than any evidence. The ballroom buzzed with approval, the tide fully against him now. Then, a new figure approached the stage, a stern-faced man in a navy suit, flashing a badge. Gasps swept the room. Adrian Cole, the man announced, his voice carrying authority. We need to have a word regarding financial misconduct and corporate fraud. You'll come with us. The ballroom froze. Adrian's eyes widened, his bravado collapsing entirely. He shook his head violently. No, this can't be happening. Not here. Not tonight. But as two agents stepped forward, the crowd pressing closer with their phones raised, Adrian realized the nightmare had only just begun. And the worst was still to come. Serena Vale had built her entire identity on glitter and borrowed power. For months, she thrived on being photographed at Adrian's side, her name printed beneath glossy headlines like the city's rising star and the woman behind the tech mogul. But tonight, under the unforgiving chandeliers of the Astoria Grand, the shine began to peel away. As Adrian was confronted by investigators, Serena's smile vanished. Her hand trembled around her champagne glass until it slipped, shattering against the marble floor. Every eye turned to her, the once envied mistress, now revealed as the woman who had gleefully benefited from stolen money. Those trips, those gifts, whispered one guest, her jeweled hand covering her mouth, all on the company's dime? She knew, another hissed. She had to know. Serena felt the whispers like daggers. She scanned the room, desperate for someone to defend her, but found only narrowed eyes and shaking heads. The same socialites who once begged to know her beauty secrets now shifted away, as if her scandal was contagious. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing mercilessly. Serena, did you knowingly use misappropriated funds? Were you complicit in covering Adrian's misconduct? Did you conspire with him against his wife? She raised her hands, her voice cracking. I didn't know. I had no idea where the money came from. But her protests only fueled the fire. On the screens behind her, receipts highlighted her name, designer boutiques, five-star resorts, luxury cars. The evidence was damning. Serena turned on Adrian, her voice shrill. You told me it was clean. You promised me no one would ever know. Adrian, his own empire collapsing, spat back with venom. You wanted everything. Don't you dare act innocent now. The room buzzed with disgust. Investors muttered angrily, already calculating losses. A board member sneered. This is who you trusted? A CEO blinded by his mistress? Serena's face burned. She tried to stand tall, but her carefully constructed persona crumbled. The diamonds at her throat suddenly felt like chains. The gown she had chosen to outshine Eliza now clung to her like ridicule. She turned toward the crowd, her voice desperate. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I loved him. The words landed with a hollow thud. No one applauded, no one comforted. Even sympathy refused to stand beside her. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. She glanced down, hoping for reassurance, but the screen displayed a flood of messages. Brand deals canceled, invitations revoked, PR representatives cutting ties. The digital world was already erasing her, faster than the ink on tomorrow's headlines. Panic clawed at her chest. She spun on her heel, ready to storm out, but a group of photographers blocked the exit. Flashbulbs blinded her, their questions sharp as knives. Did you manipulate Adrian into stealing? Were you the reason he abandoned his wife? Tears streaked her mascara, black rivers staining her flawless image. She shoved past the cameras, her once perfect poise shattered. From across the room, Eliza watched silently. She felt no triumph, no vindication, only a cold recognition. Serena had once mocked her, whispered lies, and laughed at her pain. Now the world had turned on her with the same cruelty she had inflicted. Ethan leaned close, his voice steady. Poetic, isn't it? The higher they climb on false glory, the harder the fall. Eliza said nothing. She only touched her belly gently, whispering to her child, This is why we stand tall in truth. But as Serena fled into the flashing storm of cameras, another announcement cut through the chaos. One that would drag Adrian's fall even deeper, and pull Eliza into a decision that would change her life forever. The ballroom had become a storm. Investigators circling Adrian, Serena fleeing in disgrace, whispers rising like thunder among the city's elite. But at the center of it all, Eliza stood tall, emerald silk flowing around her, her hand firm on her swollen belly. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't weeping, she was simply present, and that alone unsettled Adrian more than anything. Ethan Blackwell, however, saw the chaos as an opportunity. He stepped forward, his commanding presence silencing the crowd without a single raised voice. The cameras immediately swung toward him, recognizing the billionaire whose empire stretched across continents. Ladies and gentlemen, Ethan began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly. Tonight was meant to celebrate innovation and leadership. But what we've witnessed instead is the collapse of arrogance, greed, and deceit. Murmurs spread, but no one dared interrupt. Ethan's reputation was untouchable. His words carried weight. He turned slightly, gesturing toward Eliza. For too long, Adrian Cole used lies to control the narrative. He discarded the very woman who stood beside him, who believed in him, who carried his child. He treated her as an inconvenience rather than the partner she was. And now you see the truth for yourselves. Adrian lunged forward, his voice shaking. You can't hijack my stage, Blackwell. This is my night. Ethan's eyes didn't even flicker. Your night ended the moment she walked through those doors. The audience gasped, some applauding softly, others whispering with approval. The shift was undeniable. Adrian's throne had crumbled, and Ethan was claiming the ground he left exposed. Ethan then took a step closer to Eliza, his voice softening but still loud enough to carry. This woman has been painted as weak, forgotten, erased. But I see her strength, I see her courage, and I will not stand by while her story is twisted into lies. He reached for her hand, steady and deliberate. Cameras exploded in flashes as their fingers intertwined. The room buzzed, headlines practically writing themselves. Blackwell stands with Cole's ex-wife. Adrian's face contorted with rage. You're using her to make me look weak. Ethan met his glare head-on. No, Adrian. You made yourself look weak when you chose pride over family, greed over love, and cruelty over compassion. Eliza doesn't need me to stand beside her, but I choose to, because she deserves honor, not humiliation. The crowd erupted, this time in applause. Tables of investors, philanthropists, and journalists leaned forward, captivated. Adrian, once the center of adoration, now stood red-faced, fists clenched as the world shifted away from him. Eliza's heart pounded. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected anyone, let alone a man of Ethan's stature, to stand publicly for her. Tears stung her eyes, not of weakness but of something long buried. Validation. For the first time since Adrian cast her out, she felt seen. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. leaning close. "You don't have to fight this battle alone anymore," he whispered. Adrian's voice cracked as he shouted over the applause. "This isn't over. You'll regret this, Eliza. You both will." But his threats only sounded hollow now, drowned beneath the clapping, the flashing lights, and the weight of his own downfall. And then Ethan did something no one expected. He lifted his other hand to quiet the room, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. "There is one more truth that needs to be told tonight. One more step to make things right." The ballroom leaned in, breathless, every camera fixed on him. Ethan turned toward Eliza, his eyes steady, his voice unwavering. "I will not let her walk this path alone. Not as a client, not as a friend. Tonight I make a vow." The ballroom was still buzzing from Ethan's bold declaration, every guest leaning forward, every camera trained on him and Eliza. But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. Ethan held Eliza's hand firmly, his presence calm yet commanding. He turned to face her fully, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "Eliza Moore," he said, every word deliberate, "you have been treated as if your worth was measured by what a man could give or take from you. But I see the truth. You are strong, capable, and deserving of every good thing this life has to offer, and I refuse to let you fight this world alone." The whispers swelled, anticipation crackling like electricity. Some gasped. Others lifted their phones higher, knowing history was about to be made. Then, to the shock of everyone, including Eliza, Ethan bent to one knee. The room erupted into chaos. Shouts, gasps, applause, all colliding in a storm of disbelief and excitement. The billionaire developer, known for his cold composure and ruthless deals, was kneeling before a woman the world had dismissed as a broken ex-wife. "Eliza," Ethan continued, his eyes steady on hers, "I don't ask this to save you. You don't need saving. I ask because I want to build a life with someone who has already proven more courage than any boardroom warrior I've ever met. Marry me. Let's stand together, not in the shadows, but in the light." Eliza's heart pounded so hard she thought the room could hear it. Her knees wobbled, her breath shallow. She had not expected this, not here, not now, in front of every billionaire, politician, and journalist in New York. She searched his face, looking for hidden motives, but found only sincerity. His eyes weren't asking for spectacle. They were asking for trust. Adrian exploded. "This is insane. You can't. This is a stunt. You're making a fool of yourself, Blackwell." His voice cracked, shrill, desperate. But no one listened. The spotlight had shifted entirely. Serena was gone, Adrian was crumbling, and the cameras captured only one image: Eliza, radiant in emerald silk, her child safe within her, and the billionaire on one knee offering her the dignity and partnership she had been denied. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, not from fear, but from release. For so long she had carried the weight of shame, abandonment, and loneliness. Now, in front of the very people who once judged her, she was being offered honor. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling but strong. "Yes." The room erupted. Applause thundered, some guests rising to their feet, cameras flashing like lightning. The master of ceremonies, caught between shock and awe, muttered into the microphone, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've just witnessed history." Ethan rose, pulling Eliza gently into his arms. He kissed her hand, sealing the vow not with spectacle, but with quiet respect. Adrian staggered backward, his face a mask of disbelief. No, this isn't happening. She's mine. She'll always be mine." His words were a hollow echo, drowned by cheers and claps. Eliza turned toward him, her eyes sharp as steel. "I was never yours, Adrian. You just fooled yourself into thinking I was." The crowd roared with approval, the final nail in Adrian's coffin, and as the applause thundered, an official approached with urgent documents in hand, papers that would not only strip Adrian of his empire, but deliver his punishment faster than anyone in the room expected. The applause for Ethan and Eliza still echoed when the ballroom doors opened once again. Two men in dark suits entered, their polished shoes tapping rhythmically against the marble. They carried folders thick with documents, their expressions grave. The master of ceremonies faltered as one of them whispered in his ear, but then he steadied his voice, announcing, "Mr. Adrian Cole, we have here official filings from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the State Attorney's Office." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests craned their necks, eager for the next blow. Cameras surged forward, catching every detail. The lead investigator stepped onto the stage, his tone cold and precise. "Mr. Cole, your misuse of company funds, falsified expense reports, and personal enrichment schemes have been under review for months. Tonight, with this evidence, your assets are frozen. You are hereby suspended as CEO pending a full criminal investigation." The words landed like cannon fire. Adrian's jaw fell open. Suspended? Frozen? This is absurd. I am the company. A board member rose from his table, voice cutting through the chaos. "Not anymore, Adrian. We've already voted in an emergency session. You're out, effective immediately." Applause broke out, not polite but forceful, cathartic, almost vengeful. Investors who had once cheered him now clapped with relief at his downfall. They had waited too long for this moment. Adrian staggered, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He turned desperately to Serena, but she was gone, fled into the night, leaving him to face the ruin alone. He spun back to the crowd, trying to recover. "You can't do this to me. You need me. I built this empire with my own hands." Ethan's voice rang out steady and calm. "You didn't build it with your hands, Adrian. You built it on lies, stolen money, and the backs of people you used and discarded. Tonight, the empire you claimed as yours belongs back to those who deserve it." The room erupted again, the tide fully against him now. Adrian's chest heaved as he tried to fight back. "This is all her fault," he screamed, pointing at Eliza. His voice cracked. "She planned this. She wanted revenge. She's ruining me." Eliza didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her belly pronounced, her gaze unwavering. "No, Adrian, you ruined yourself. I simply stopped hiding it for you." The audience applauded again, louder this time, drowning out Adrian's protests. Reporters scribbled furiously, their headlines practically writing themselves. "Adrian Cole's empire crashes at Gala. Pregnant ex-wife returns to expose tech mogul." Then the investigator delivered the final blow. "Mr. Cole, you are ordered to surrender your passport and remain available for questioning. Should you attempt to flee, you will be taken into custody." Adrian's face crumpled. He collapsed into a chair, his once pristine tuxedo now clinging to a man drenched in sweat and humiliation. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the fall of a titan in real time. All around him, allies turned their backs. Investors muttered about cutting losses. Guests whispered about distancing themselves. The empire he clung to was ashes slipping through his fingers. But as the spotlight shifted away from Adrian, all eyes turned once more to Eliza. She stood tall, radiant in emerald silk, Ethan's steady presence beside her. She had not raised her voice, had not begged or pleaded. Simply by standing in truth, she had triumphed. Adrian's lips trembled as he muttered, "This isn't over. It can't be over." But as the crowd cheered Eliza's resilience, a journalist's question rang out across the ballroom. "Mrs. Moore, what comes next for you and for the man now standing at your side?" While Adrian's empire burned inside the Astoria Grand, Serena Vale faced her own collapse outside. She had slipped away from the ballroom as the evidence unraveled, her heels clicking desperately against the marble as she fled through the lobby. But the flashing storm followed her. Paparazzi swarmed, cameras firing like bullets, their questions sharp and merciless. "Serena, did you know the money came from company funds? Were you part of the cover-up? Did you push Adrian Cole to abandon his pregnant wife?" She raised her hands, shielding her face, but the bulbs only flared brighter. Her once perfect poise cracked, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Leave me alone. You don't understand," she cried, her voice shrill with panic. There was no escape. Cars screeched to a halt as photographers blocked the street, reporters shouting into live broadcasts. The woman once adored for her beauty and glamour now appeared desperate, cornered, undone. Inside the ballroom, news broke even faster. Phones buzzed at every table as Serena's brand partners issued public statements. "Effective immediately, Serena Vale is no longer affiliated with our company. We do not condone unethical behavior." Within minutes, the digital world that had built her image began erasing her. On Instagram, her follower count plummeted in real time. Millions dwindled to thousands, the comment sections filling with venom. "Gold digger, homewrecker. Enjoy the fall." Memes surfaced instantly, screenshots of her flaunting jewelry now captioned, "Stolen diamonds don't sparkle forever." Serena's phone buzzed relentlessly in her clutch, but the notifications weren't offers, they were cancellations. The luxury brand that had once gifted her gowns severed ties. A skincare company dropped her mid-campaign. Influencer agencies she had begged to join now blocked her number. She ducked into an alley, her breath ragged, her gown dragging against dirty pavement. For the first time, no one wanted to photograph her beauty. They only wanted evidence of her disgrace. Her mind spiraled back to earlier that evening. The smug laughter at Adrian's side, the champagne toast, the whispered taunts about Eliza. She had felt untouchable then. Now, the same world that applauded her rise was devouring her fall. A text buzzed again. She pulled out her phone, desperate for comfort. It was from Adrian. Only 2 words glared back at her. "You're finished." Her knees buckled. The man she had betrayed another woman for, the man she had defended and paraded beside, had abandoned her without hesitation the moment she became a liability. She wasn't a partner. She had never been. She was just another asset, discarded as quickly as Eliza once had been. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled toward the curb. A group of young women nearby recognized her, their voices dripping with mockery. "Is that Serena Vale? God, she looks awful in person. Guess money can't buy loyalty." Laughter followed her like stones hurled at her pride. For Serena, the realization cut deeper than the headlines. She hadn't just lost Adrian. She had lost the stage, the spotlight, the illusion that she mattered. Without him, she was no one. She pulled her coat tight around her shoulders, retreating into the night, her phone still buzzing with the digital execution of her career. And as Serena vanished into the shadows, the cameras pivoted back to the ballroom, where Eliza, radiant and unbroken, was about to face the question that would define her future. What would she do with her newfound power? The chaos of the night slowly ebbed like a storm finally passing. Adrian was escorted out of the ballroom in disgrace, his empire stripped before his very eyes. Serena had vanished into the shadows, her once glittering name collapsing under the weight of scandal. But in the golden light of the Astoria Grand, Eliza Moore stood untouched, stronger than ever. The applause had quieted, the guests whispering in awe, some with tears shining in their eyes. But for Eliza, the world around her blurred. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of life inside. Through all the betrayal, the loneliness, the humiliation, her child had been her anchor. Ethan turned to her, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Do you feel it? The weight finally lifting?" She nodded, tears sliding freely down her cheeks. "For the first time, I can breathe." He reached up gently, brushing a tear away. "You've carried so much alone, you don't have to anymore." Eliza closed her eyes, letting those words sink in. For months, she had whispered promises to her baby in the silence of her small studio apartment. Promises that she would never give up, never let the world destroy them. And now, standing in the very place where Adrian had once erased her, she had kept that promise. A journalist approached cautiously, microphone trembling in her hand. "Miss Moore, do you have anything you'd like to say to the public, to the women watching tonight?" Eliza inhaled deeply, her heart pounding, then lifted her chin. Her voice rang clear, steady, strong. "I want them to know. No one has the right to decide your worth for you. Not a man, not a title, not even the world. If you're carrying life, whether it's a child, a dream, or your own truth, you protect it. You fight for it, even when it feels impossible." The room erupted in applause, not polite this time, but powerful. Women in glittering gowns wiped their eyes. Men nodded solemnly. For once, Eliza wasn't invisible. She was a voice, and the world was listening. Ethan's gaze never left her. When the applause faded, he whispered, "I think your child will be proud to know their mother changed lives tonight." She smiled softly. "I just want them to know they were wanted, that they were worth fighting for." The orchestra began to play again, softer this time, filling the space with something tender instead of triumphant. Ethan offered his hand, and she accepted. Together, they stepped away from the chaos of the stage, weaving through guests who reached out to squeeze her hand, to whisper encouragement, to thank her for her courage. Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of the city. For the first time in months, Eliza felt peace. No headlines, no whispers, no Adrian, just the cool night sky and the warmth of Ethan's steady presence. She tilted her head back, watching the stars hidden between skyscrapers. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced at her, his hand covering hers. "For him, yes. For you, this is just the beginning." Eliza smiled, her heart swelling. The scars of the past would never vanish, but they no longer defined her. She was free to build again. This time, not in someone else's shadow, but in her own light. But as she rested her hand on her belly, a wave of pain rippled through her body, sharp and sudden. Her smile faded, replaced by alarm. The baby was coming, sooner than anyone expected. The sharp pain stole Eliza's breath. She doubled over on the steps outside the Astoria Grand, clutching her belly as another contraction tore through her body. Gasps erupted from the small crowd that had followed her outside. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Ethan was instantly at her side, his arms steadying her, his voice calm, though his eyes blazed with urgency. "Eliza, look at me. Breathe. You're not alone. I'm right here." Tears filled her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming rush of everything. Tonight, she had stood tall against the man who tried to erase her. Tonight, she had reclaimed her dignity, and now her child was demanding to be born, as if destiny itself wanted to seal this chapter once and for all. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, whisking her into the ambulance. Ethan climbed in beside her without hesitation, holding her hand tightly as sirens wailed through the city streets. "You've already proven how strong you are," he whispered. "Now let's bring this baby into the world." The hospital lights blurred, doctors' voices a whirl of instructions, but Eliza focused on Ethan's hand and the sound of her own breath. Hours later, in the quiet glow of dawn, as the cries of a newborn filled the room, Eliza's tears flowed freely as the nurse placed the tiny bundle into her arms. A daughter, perfect, fragile, and alive. She traced the baby's soft cheek with trembling fingers, whispering, "You're safe now. You were always wanted." Ethan stood nearby, his usually composed face softened by awe. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, "just like her mother." For Eliza, time seemed to stop. All the pain, all the fear, all the humiliation of the past months dissolved in that moment. She had her child. She had her future. And she was no longer alone. News traveled quickly. By morning, headlines blazed across every outlet. Adrian Cole faces fraud charges. Pregnant ex-wife gives birth after gala showdown. Billionaire Ethan Blackwell stands beside Eliza Moore. The city had chosen its narrative, and it wasn't Adrian's. Meanwhile, Adrian sat alone in his penthouse, the empire he once flaunted frozen and crumbling. His phone buzzed with calls from lawyers, creditors, and furious investors. But no one wanted to hear his excuses anymore. Serena had vanished. His allies had abandoned him. And in the silence, he finally faced the truth. His downfall had been swift, public, and absolute. Back at the hospital, Eliza rested with her daughter nestled against her chest. Ethan entered quietly, holding a bouquet of white lilies. He set them down gently before sitting beside her. "You changed everything last night," he said softly. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who needed to see that strength." Eliza smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone." He reached for her hand, his gaze steady. "Then let's not do anything alone again." The words carried more weight than any proposal. They weren't about spectacle or headlines. They were about partnership, about building something real. Eliza looked down at her daughter, then back at Ethan. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with light instead of shadows. She whispered, almost to herself, "We're finally free." Ethan leaned closer, brushing a kiss against her forehead. And this is only the beginning. As the morning sun bathed the hospital room in gold, Eliza Moore, the woman once discarded, humiliated, and silenced, held her child and her future. Adrian's reign was over. Serena was forgotten. And Eliza, standing in her truth, had stepped into a new life filled not with fear, but with hope, love, and justice fulfilled. So that's how this story comes to an end. My dear friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a special way. And maybe that's the real message. Life will throw betrayal, pain, and storms at us, but none of it defines who we are unless we let it. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. Eliza's story reminds us that dignity, resilience, and truth shine brighter than any wealth or false glory. Just like her, we may be broken down, but we can rise again, not in spite of our scars, but because of them. If this story spoke to you, take a deep breath right now and remind yourself, I am stronger than what tried to break me. Carry that with you into your own battles, big or small. And if you felt even a little healing here tonight, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs courage, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we'll keep telling stories that remind us how powerful the human heart really is. The storm outside had nothing on the storm inside their apartment. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder shook the walls, but the words tearing through the night cut deeper than any lightning strike. "You're going to end this pregnancy, Eliza." Adrian's voice was cold, calculated, like he was negotiating a business deal rather than speaking to his own wife. His jaw was clenched, his eyes sharp, his entire body radiating control. Eliza Moore stood frozen in the middle of the living room, her hands trembling as they instinctively moved to her stomach. Just 6 weeks pregnant, she had only started to feel the faintest flutter of life inside her, but already her heart was tied to that tiny being. Her voice cracked. "This is our baby, Adrian. How can you even say that?" Adrian scoffed, pacing like a caged predator. "I have a company about to go public. Investors are watching my every move. Do you think they want a distracted CEO with a wife waddling around, whining about cravings and doctor visits? You think anyone is going to take me seriously with that image?" Her chest burned. She thought of their wedding vows, the promises of love, the whispered dreams they once shared. And now here he was, treating her pregnancy as a blemish on his career. Tears welled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I won't do it. I won't kill my child, just to make your life easier." His laughter was sharp, bitter. "You think you have a choice?" He stepped closer, his voice low and poisonous. "Either you take care of it, or you can get out. Don't test me, Eliza. I don't bluff." The words sliced her open. Get out. After everything she had sacrificed for him, her career, her independence, her trust, this was his answer. She stared at him, her vision blurred with tears, but her mind suddenly crystal clear. She grabbed her coat from the hook by the door, her hands shaking but determined. She didn't pack a bag, didn't take anything else. Just her purse, her keys, and the fragile spark of life growing inside her. Adrian didn't even try to stop her. He simply turned back to the window, lifting his glass of whiskey like he had already won. "You'll be back," he muttered. "Women like you always crawl back." Eliza stepped into the storm, the cold rain soaking her within seconds. Each drop stung, but it only fueled the fire inside her. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know how she would survive, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would keep this baby, no matter the cost. And years later, when Adrian least expected it, this very choice would come crashing back into his glittering world, in front of every billionaire in New York. Eliza Moore had always been the kind of woman people overlooked. At 27, she wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor the one dressed in designer labels. She had grown up in a small town outside Chicago, the daughter of a mechanic and a school librarian. Her parents had raised her on simple values: kindness, humility, and the belief that love was supposed to mean safety. When she met Adrian Cole, she thought she had found exactly that. He was charming, successful, and so confident that being near him felt like stepping into a brighter world. Back then, she didn't see the red flags. She only saw the man who sent her flowers just because, who whispered about the family they would build, who made her believe she was the missing piece of his puzzle. So, when he slipped a diamond ring on her finger and promised her forever, she said yes, without hesitation. She traded her modest apartment for his sleek penthouse overlooking Manhattan, her quiet routines for glamorous charity dinners, her independence for the dream of a life together. For a while, she believed it was everything she ever wanted. But behind the glossy photos and social media smiles, her reality was different. Adrian's charm shifted into control. He criticized her clothes, her career, her friends. He demanded she quit her job in interior design because it was beneath the image of a CEO's wife. He convinced her to cut ties with people who didn't fit their new circle. Slowly, piece by piece, Eliza disappeared into the role he had scripted for her. The only time she still felt like herself was when she designed in secret, sketching floor plans on napkins, arranging furniture in their apartment while Adrian was away, or helping a neighbor choose colors for her remodel. Those stolen hours reminded her of the woman she had been before Adrian's shadow swallowed her whole. And then, the pregnancy changed everything. For Eliza, the moment she saw those two pink lines, life snapped into focus. She wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was carrying proof of love, hope, and second chances. She imagined tiny hands wrapped around her finger, late-night feedings, and lullabies whispered in the dark. She imagined finally being a family in the way she had dreamed. But Adrian's reaction had crushed those dreams in a single night. His demand for an abortion, his icy threat to throw her out. It was the moment she realized the man she had married had never loved her the way she loved him. Now, living alone in a modest rented studio on the edge of the city, Eliza rebuilt her life, brick by brick. She worked late nights taking freelance design jobs, often surviving on instant noodles and sheer determination. The morning sickness made everything harder. Some days she couldn't get out of bed without crying, yet every time she placed her hand on her growing belly, she whispered, "We'll be okay. I promise." Her neighbors noticed her quiet strength. The elderly woman downstairs brought her homemade soup. A college student offered to carry her groceries. They saw a fragile young woman, but also one refusing to break. And little by little, that gave Eliza courage. Still, the shadows of her past haunted her. Every time she passed a newsstand with Adrian's face on the cover, every time she scrolled past a headline praising his company, she felt the sting of betrayal. He was thriving while she fought just to keep the lights on. But she didn't let herself drown in bitterness. Instead, she poured everything into preparing for her child. She clipped coupons, painted secondhand cribs, and stitched tiny blankets late into the night. Hope was fragile, but it was hers. And somewhere deep down, a spark of fire burned. She might have been cast aside, but she wasn't finished. She was carrying not just a baby, but the beginning of her own rebirth. What Eliza didn't know was that her quiet strength was about to draw the attention of someone powerful enough to change everything. New York City has a way of reminding people where they stand. For Adrian Cole, it meant being photographed on red carpets, sipping champagne with politicians and celebrities, flashing that confident smile that made investors believe he could turn air into gold. For Eliza Moore, it meant standing in line at the corner market, counting the bills in her hand twice before buying milk and bread, then hauling groceries up 3 flights of stairs to her tiny studio apartment. Her new home was nothing like the penthouse she once shared with Adrian. Gone were the floor-to-ceiling windows with their glittering skyline views. Instead, Eliza lived in a one-room walk-up on the city's edge, where the radiator clanked in the middle of the night and the pipes rattled whenever she turned on the faucet. The walls were thin, but she didn't mind. She found comfort in the sounds of life around her. The crying baby next door, the hum of a television from across the hall, the laughter of kids racing down the stairwell. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real. Every morning, she walked through cracked sidewalks past bodegas and laundromats, her hand resting gently on her growing belly. She was 6 months pregnant now, her body aching from the weight she carried, but she held her head high. At night, she returned to her studio, where sketches and swatches of fabric littered the small desk in the corner. She still designed when she could, creating blueprints and mock-ups for clients who paid modestly, but appreciated her vision. The contrast between her world and Adrian's couldn't have been starker. He was constantly in the society pages, standing beside Serena Val, his new business associate, whose perfect smile and glittering gowns screamed ambition. Together, they attended private galas and exclusive dinners. Their photographs splashed across glossy magazines under headlines like the power couple of tomorrow. Eliza tried not to look, but it was impossible to escape. Screens lit up with his name in coffee shops, headlines flashed across news apps. His empire was growing, and he flaunted Serena like a trophy. To the world, they looked untouchable. To Eliza, it was a daily reminder of how cruelly she had been discarded. And yet, she wasn't bitter. If anything, the disparity fueled her determination. Every late-night sketch she finished, every small project she delivered, she saw as another brick in the foundation of a life she was building. Not just for herself, but for her child. Her world was quiet, but in that quiet, she was finding her strength again. The city around her echoed that duality. Uptown, chandeliers sparkled over black tie galas where fortunes were pledged over glasses of vintage wine. Downtown, Eliza walked past neon-lit diners and second-hand shops, clutching her sketchbook like it was armor. Each world existed in the same city, but they were galaxies apart. Still, fate has a way of weaving threads where you least expect them. One evening, as Eliza delivered design samples to a small office renovation project, she found herself standing inside a glass tower in Midtown. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and towering art installations. She felt out of place in her thrifted coat, her belly showing beneath the fabric, but she pressed forward, determined to finish the job. That night, she didn't realize whose building she had just walked into. Nor did she know that her quiet sketches were about to reach eyes powerful enough to shift the very balance of her life. Because somewhere in that tower, a billionaire who had built empires from nothing was about to notice the work of a woman Adrienne Cole had thrown away. And nothing would ever be the same again. Adrienne Cole had perfected the art of wearing a mask. To the outside world, he was the golden boy of tech, a 32-year-old CEO who had transformed a struggling startup into a billion-dollar empire. He was tall, charismatic, and possessed the kind of smile that could convince investors to sign million-dollar checks without hesitation. Journalists praised his brilliance, business magazines ranked him among the top 40 under 40, and every stage he stepped on turned into a spotlight. But behind that polished image lived a man consumed by ego. The charm he displayed at press conferences and networking events was nothing but a carefully rehearsed act. At home, or at least back when Eliza had been in his home, his words cut sharper than knives. He demanded absolute control, not just in the boardroom but in his personal life. And when Eliza dared to resist, he discarded her like a failed investment. Now Adrienne had Serena Vale. At 25, Serena was everything he thought he wanted: young, ambitious, and ruthless. She wasn't just his mistress anymore. She was his public accessory, the one he paraded at every gala and charity dinner. She played her role flawlessly, clinging to his arm, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, and leaning in close whenever cameras flashed. Together, they cultivated the image of a power couple. Serena posted carefully staged photos on social media, her sipping champagne on a private jet, her hand resting possessively on Adrienne's chest, their silhouettes framed against the New York skyline. She tagged them with captions like #unstoppable couple goals, and the comments poured in. People envied them, admired them, wanted to be them. But those who looked closer saw cracks. Serena's ambition was barely concealed. She wanted more than just Adrienne's arm. She wanted his empire. And Adrienne, blinded by vanity, was too arrogant to see the danger of placing someone like her at his side. In board meetings, whispers spread. Senior executives noticed Serena's presence at discussions where she had no official role. She offered opinions, influenced decisions, and sometimes even contradicted Adrienne's closest advisors. Her confidence grew with each passing week, and Adrienne let it happen because he believed he was untouchable. Yet arrogance has a way of breeding enemies. Some investors grumbled about his recklessness. Rumors of inappropriate spending circulated: lavish gifts for Serena, company funds disguised as client entertainment. Adrienne brushed it all off, convinced his charm could smooth over any cracks. And while Eliza struggled to keep her lights on, Adrienne spent 6 figures on a weekend in Capri with Serena, flaunting their luxury to anyone who would look. To him, humiliation was a game. He often smirked at the idea that Eliza might still be out there, struggling. In private, he would laugh with Serena, saying, "She probably regrets not doing what I told her. Women like that can't survive without a man." But fate has a way of listening. The very arrogance that fueled his rise was planting the seeds of his fall, because even as Adrienne polished his image and Serena sharpened her claws, there were eyes watching, people who remembered how he had treated Eliza. People who had receipts, documents, and memories of his cruelty. And one of those sets of eyes belonged to a billionaire who had the power to turn Adrienne's glittering mask into ashes. The night Adrienne believed would crown him the king of the city would instead become the night he lost everything, starting with the moment a very pregnant Eliza walked back into his world.